And most practitioners connected with the Act also conclude that given our invaluable experience garnered over the 11 years of its existence so far, and the obvious limitations and shortcomings which have surfaced during this period, there is a need to make some changes in the legislation to improve its relevance and efficacy. Since the police are often literally in the line of fire, and they are usually the first point of contact and support for victims of sexual crimes and sexual violence, let's first hear from Inspector Alexander.
I think there are the need for the minor amendments in terms of the need for the mandatory reporting on the part of parent, guardian, caregivers. That is one of the major areas. Some other practitioners would speak to the question of increasing the age of consent. I don't see that necessarily assisting in containing the problem that we currently face. I think what is required is the level of public sensitization, educating of our children, parents, guardian, the general public about, the Sexual Offences Act and the provisions.
And having worked for over 2 decades in this field, Mrs. Alex Boyd Knights has some practical and targeted suggestions for changes to the current Sexual Offences Act.
There are several scenarios which glaringly exhibit the inadequacies of that act. I'm going to give an example. Such is the case where a young girl of 16 or under presents herself at the hospital to have a baby. Is this not the most vivid example that a crime has most likely been committed? I say most likely because it may be possible that the person who impregnated this young girl was just 14 at the time of conception. But whose responsibility is it to inform the police of the likelihood of that crime? Absolutely no one. Not the parents, not the guardian, not the doctor, not the nurse, not the hospital orderly, not the teacher, no one. In its present state, therefore, what the Act is doing is creating a situation where no one is obliged to make a report to the police or any other authority. Personally, I have made many requests to have that aspect of the Sexual Offences Act revisited. As yet, to no avail. I am one of those persons who feel very strongly that the rehabilitation aspect of the Act is woefully inadequate. Yes, somebody is alleged to have committed a crime of rape. Yes, the person is charged. Yes, the person has to go through the process of being having a trial and all of this, and they go to jail. What happens while they're in jail? Is there any sort of mechanism within the legislation or any envisaged regulations attached to the legislation that is going to ensure that that person who has committed a sexual offense is going to be rehabilitated whilst in prison? Is the person going to see a psychiatrist? What is going to happen to that person? And when the person comes out of jail, what do we do? Do we put a red cross on their head so that everybody in the society knows that that person is a rapist? Has been, the Act stops short of doing this, and I think that that is an anomaly and that needs to be addressed. Again, I want to stress that I am among those persons who feel very strongly that this particular legislation, this particular Sexual Offences Act, is almost pointless without adequate enforcement mechanism built into this legislation itself. And what do I mean by that? Well, enforcement embraces 3 aspects. First, you have the complaint, the information or the report. Secondly, you have the investigation. And thirdly, you have the prosecution. The first is to be undertaken by the victim or someone on the victim's behalf. For example, a parent, a guardian, medical personnel, a teacher. But the second and third aspects of enforcement have to be carried out by the police. Very clearly, the police therefore play a major role in enforcement generally. Therefore, the Act by necessity, include provisions obliging the police to act. I have had a situation where a father brings his 16-year-old daughter to me. She's going on 17. He found out that she was sexually active because he had to take her to the doctor. She was not well, and when he looked at the medication she was asked to get, he associated it with a sexually transmitted disease. On questioning his daughter, he found out that it was his best friend, whose vehicle he regularly maintains, is the perpetrator. He wants something done to the man. I had to persuade with every fiber of my being to the police to act under the Children and Young Persons Act. I think it's section 4, which basically says anybody who assumes the care and control of a minor, and I'm paraphrasing, okay, is responsible for that minor, and anything untoward that happens to the minor, that person is responsible. For example, if a 19-year-old invites his 17-year-old friend to come on his bike without the knowledge or consent of his parents, and anything happens to him, well, he's responsible. I have also brought to the attention of successive attorneys general the fact that young girls between the ages of 16 and 18 have become fair fodder for predators, particularly those with transport and or with money to burn. Okay? My suggestion is that an amendment be made to the Children and Young Persons Act to make it an offense to contribute to the delinquency of a minor.
Interestingly, most of the foregoing sentiments were echoed by Mr. Martin Anthony of the Welfare Department, who summed up his department's recommendation with regard to the Sexual Offences Act No. 1 of 1998 as follows.
I mentioned 6 areas, 6 specific areas where provisions are made in some cases, but provisions are not made in some cases. As I indicated, the whole question of mandatory reporting is not part of our act, of the present act, but it's under the Child Care and Adoption Bill, which has now been proposed by the OECS Legal Affairs Unit and is with us in Dominica for possible enactment in Parliament, but it has not been enacted so far. And other areas that are already in the Act, for example, the age of consent, which persons think need to be reviewed. Do you bring it up to the age of majority, or do you keep it at 16 years of age? There's a big debate about this. And as I indicated, the whole question of the corroboration, which is a thorny area, it is whether that needs to be reviewed. The whole question of perversion of justice and out-of-court arrangements involving financial rewards to prevent a matter from going through. There is no provision in the Act for this. Just to re-emphasize that I think the Act is a very comprehensive piece of legislation. It is being used right now, and there have been many convictions under that Act. And I must say thanks to the efforts of the police, the efforts of welfare and probation officers who work so hard in ensuring that justice is done.
Going forward, Mr. Anthony suggests that the various agencies working to eliminate sexual crimes and sexual violence should work more closely together.
We need that combined effort from the entire society. One may say, how do we do it? By reporting the matters that you are aware of and allow those in child protection to investigate those matters. That by we in child protection agencies to do all what we can to collaborate as much as possible. One agency cannot do it alone. It is a fight that we have to combine our efforts. And then government must be at the forefront in terms of administrative arrangements, in terms of law, in terms of enacting the necessary piece of legislation, and so on. In enforcement, in terms of the professionals enforcing what has been on our books. So it is a combined effort, not only for those in child protection or the practitioners, but the society as a whole.